So friends, now we move on and I invite Deepika Anu. Deepika is, I would say, she's starting a new venture and she's from the new generation. And I'm sure Deepika would like to introduce herself. Deepika, why don't you take it from here, introduce yourself and then introduce the speaker. Over to you, Deepika.
Okay, thank you so much, Mehul. So hello everyone, I am Deepika. I am co-founder at N Talents and I run a company, N Talents. So we have started our journey from IIM Bangalore through an incubation. I've also studied at IIM Bangalore 3 years back. I have some 10-12 years of experience in the industry. I have been in product management. And we have built a online tool around measuring of soft skills specifically, which is, things like communication, things like rejection handling, which people often require in the non-technical workforce, especially in sales and business development. So we have tried to design something as standard as a TOEFL or an IELTS test, which can measure these standard skill sets either during recruitment or to help in training development initiatives. So that's where I come from. And I am really glad to introduce the speaker for this session, Mr. Indi Seehra. He is the Director of Human Resources at the London School of Economics and Political Science in the UK. And in addition to this, he's been an independent member of board of directors of many multi-country organizations, including the Pension Scheme for Organizations, and which is also engaged in the research activity across Europe. He's also the advisor to the International Bar Association's Global Employment Institute. He's graduated from the Portsmouth University and subsequently he's also gotten a master's degree from Sheffield Business School and University of Cambridge. Indi has also held a number of significant private and public sector UK appointments, which includes he being the HR director of the Crown Prosecution Service, and subsequently also at the National Crime Agency in the UK. Over recent years, he's been involved with the respective European Union task groups, looking to overcome the barriers of mobility for researchers. So India has basically strong interest in leadership and change management, global mobility, etc. He's also a visiting lecturer at the Graz Medical University in Austria, at University of Cambridge in UK, and also advises to Indian universities as well. He's a regular speaker at many international conferences in Singapore, Delhi, Thailand, etc. Until May 2014, he also headed up human resources at the University of Cambridge. He's also a visiting professor at Jesus College, Cambridge. He is also the initiator of the scholarship partnership between the Golden Temple at Amritsar, India, and the University of Cambridge, which has seen some 30 students studying PhD and masters since 2010. So yeah, I would now like Mr. Indi Seehra to please take over the session, and we're really glad. I'm also looking forward to listening to him.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Hopefully you can all hear me okay. This is going to be a little bit of a double act because I've got a colleague of mine, Elizabeth Vieto, who's largely worked on the slides and will take us through the slides as I speak. But basically what I'm going to do is spend about 10 minutes just presenting to you a specific case study at the London School of Economics. And I will give you some context, which is that the London School of Economics had set out its 10-year plan in 2019. And the 10-year plan therefore included, for people like me who head up HR, the need to build a 5-year medium-term human resources strategy to support that plan. And consequently, through an entire coincidence, we spent 6 months between September 2019 and March 2020 in consultation, bringing up an HR strategic plan of how a university or a higher education sector might look at developing over 5 years. Of course, the coincidence is that on the launch of the plan, it almost goes completely out of date because we go into lockdown. And the lockdown means we have to hurriedly review the work that has been done over 6 months through heavy consultation. Elisabetta, just take us on the slides, please.
He's still on the phone from the office.
Yeah. What was quite interesting is that when you actually have just developed a plan and you have a significant impact event occur, in a way, what you learn about the changes in HR are the very things that you start changing within your plan. And the new things that we had to sort of overnight consider in the context of the fact that by then we were home working and even trying to reconsider the plan in a very different way, was suddenly safekeeping of your workforce goes right up the agenda. And that wasn't where we were before in the previous scenarios. The impact of initiatives on the workload and well-being on your workforce. In other words, there are a number of things that assumes we will do this with our people and there will be people around to do it to our people and create the right community and climate. But of course, suddenly workload and well-being becomes important because A, you're not seeing your people every day. Actually, you tend to see them when you need to see them in a meeting environment. And secondly, workload is much harder to make a judgment on in relation to when you're working from home. And you can't actually see the process end to end in the way that you always have in the past. And all of this is leading up to the fact that everyone now, within weeks, between March the 23rd and the presentation day of the plan, which was May the 25th, within 2 months, expecting a very post-COVID HR strategy, which was quite difficult because what became very evident in the first 4 weeks of lockdown is we were never going to go back to anything that we knew before. In fact, the difficulty of the plan was we're not quite sure what we are going to go back to. Although as at May, we were less clear than perhaps where we are today. But what we know, and what is very unusual about a university, is that a community of people in the university, in terms of people, your staff are the minority. Usually you have more students, more alumni, more visitors than staff. And consequently, anything you do with an HR strategy very quickly begins to sound like the people strategy, and how you might behave with all that interact with the community environment of a university. So just moving on, what I'm now going to highlight is the 6 areas of dramatic change and redrafting that resulted in our HR strategy as a result of the unprecedented impacts of COVID. Firstly, to say that well-being and mental health was high on the agenda, but actually is in some ways now the highest on the agenda. And in fact, what we have done on well-being and mental health since March the 23rd is probably our biggest influencer on performance. And actually, one of the things we found is discussing the subject of performance directly during the early phases of the new ways of working is actually a barrier to staff being motivated to what already are extreme and unusual situations for them. Be it in one case, working from home, and not everybody's home is conducive to doing that. And 2, the immense lack of societal and general socialization. And of course, what we've also realized is that the experience of those working from home is very different to everybody who is new and has started with us since lockdown, who has never experienced the physical environment, against those that have always been at LSE for a long time and have a point of reference like a building or how they worked before. The second area was agile and flexible working. Clearly, it is obvious just from the way social distances is going that vast amounts of our administrative offices that were used for administration are now going to have to be teaching spaces. And consequently, we are going to require the staff that we need to come physically in one day into the university, to come in for a few hours rather than 5 days, to come in for specific points at certain times. And we've got quite a big project, and that's now commenced as part of the HR strategy, which is about the agile working of LSE and how it absorbs all the students in a wider teaching space requirement, and how it works with more staff, but actually with less capacity in its offices. Work-life balance. Well, this is quite an interesting challenge, and we don't have an answer to it, but it is clear that work-life balance has both a positive and a negative aspect from working from home. For a vast majority of people who are senior, actually, it's blurred the edges. Days are longer, and there is an end to the workday. For many others, there's been the sort of balance of home life, children, and work, where they've had to combine both in the moment. And that is proving to be, for some people, a positive, and for some people, quite a difficulty. And we're working through that. We don't have answers. What we know is that this suddenly becomes highest on the agenda as one of the things we have to address. So moving on, I'll go through the last 3 areas and then I'll stop. Professional growth. How do people develop has suddenly become important, because the turnover in the organization over the last 4 months has completely dropped. It's close to zero. We've had some leavers, very few starters, but actually there's not much movement in the higher education sector. And generally in the employment market, this is not a time when people want to move. And we anticipate that that lack of confidence will mean there'll be a lack and shortage of skill for around 2 years. So we have to build the skill internally, which is a tall challenge when you're one of the leading universities in the world and acquire world-leading professors, because we have to make them world-leading within our environment now rather than buy them in. And secondly, it is a very strong challenge to saying, well, if that's what's got to be done for both professors and for support staff, then we have to strengthen the ways in which we are growing our staff and bringing them through the learning curve. The fifth one is remote technologies. It is clear that the level of investment in a university like LSE will simply not be sufficient going forward. Most of our investment is on learning technologies rather than, if I can call it, working technologies. And there is now a sudden shift into saying we need working technologies if we are going to work in an agile way. Our current systems in HR and indeed across the board are simply not going to be good enough to keep us as a world-leading university in an environment where there is going to be so much agility of staff needed, and where people's level of competency with technology is going to have to go up 2 or 3-fold overnight. And finally, the area of reward and benefits, where something quite interesting is happening. We used to need our staff to be mobile. We wanted staff to be mobile and come to London, and we recruit internationally. Most of our recruitment is done in North America. And what is now clear is that if we keep that model up, we won't get the people we need, at least over the next 2 to 3 years, while confidence is low. So what we've had to do with our reward and benefits is to turn it all the way around and say, rather than looking for mobile people, how do we develop mobile benefits? Now, this is quite a challenge, because what it's actually doing is saying, how can we recruit international staff who can stay in their home in any country they are in and work for us and simply travel to us periodically if need be? Because that's the only way we're going to get the very best, the leading professors, those that are leaders in their research, the up-and-coming new academia staff. And to do that, we have to completely turn around the way we are thinking. So overnight, in the introduction, you were told that I'm quite heavily involved with pension benefits and sit on a couple of boards, but overnight we had to look at pension schemes that might work in different countries, and indeed develop pension schemes that might be multi-country, multi-currency, and have multi-investment opportunities. Because actually the reality is all of our staff going forward might be based in quite different countries that continue to work for LSE, and there may need to be new payment mechanisms. Now, we have the advantage in that we do have elements of staff. We have something in the region of 200 staff in 27 countries today. So we have something to work from, but it's clear that that is going to grow, and we are going to need to have mobile reward benefits to ensure that we keep the very best staff and attract them in the future to us. And on that point, let me stop, because there might be some questions and I know we're running behind. But what I've identified there hopefully is very sharply a sort of case study of a set of events where a strategy is being developed, COVID hits us, and what we find is that there are some radical changes that need to be made to the strategy. And though we are partway through making those radical changes and understanding the work that needs to be done. Thank you so much for listening to the presentation.
Deepika?
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think the points that have been highlighted regarding the COVID workplace situations, we all have been experiencing this in some form or the other. And not only in my organization, but among my friends group, a lot of people are struggling through the exact points that you have mentioned in your presentation. And I think it's the right time for us to focus and take the opportunity to transform into an organization which is much more aligned to the post-COVID world. I think we will have some questions from the participants here. You can either type the questions or directly unmute yourself and ask.
Deepika, unmuting will not be possible.
So yeah,
so I think we can take one question from the QA box, and then we can close the session.
Yeah, so the way I'm reading the chat, some folks have questions regarding what is the best way to manage performance and results from the new work from home situations. And
yes, so shall I have a go at attempting to give some idea of that? So in year one of post-COVID, the management of performance is very light touch. Because if you think that you are going to give hard targets to people at a time when they're going through some unprecedented change, and you have to have the reality. I mean, there is at least one person on the floor that I work on who has passed away. That has had a huge effect on up to about 100 or so work colleagues who worked on the same floor. So you have to be realistic. You are not going to get individual performance out in year one. And what you have to do is look at organizational performance. And for many of us, quite frankly, that might be survival indicators.
Yeah.
Then my judgment is that in year two, you start to bring in performance in the context of what's already been said, development. Yeah? And it's not till year three that we think we will get back to performance in the sense of A, the targets as we have been placing them, and B, the understanding of how can we assist and monitor performance in an environment where the only time we see an individual is when we're directly interacting with them on Teams or in some sort of technology. Because that will be the reality. The judgment is that in 12 months' time from today, human resources in LSE will open and 10% of the staff at any one time will be allowed in. So you can see, for somebody like me, I'm a long way from seeing my people face to face. And I think that will have to be through some KPI matrices and through some form of monitoring, which allows us to look at performance more in terms of behavior than output. Because what becomes clear is that when you have people working from an agile way, the only interpretation of what's being said is in the moment that they've spoken to you on Teams. There's no other ongoing moment to moment. So your ability to influence and steer and perform strategy is very important at senior level, but I think there will need to be some independent KPI measurements which will give us clues to performance. So I think it's got a challenge, but I think to say, let's have the best out of people today through what they have been going through is just not going to be real. And certainly if I talk about performance, it tends to at the moment put people off rather than on. We talk about survival, and we talk about all the things we need to do together in HR for survival, and we talk about all the things we need to do together as LSC for survival.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Indi.
Thank you, Deepika, and thank you, Indi.